Welcome GRD132 Typography 1 to a review of Ex10 Readability and also Ex11, which is going to be readability for the web. Now Ex10 we did in class, but for anybody who wasn't in class, I'm going to review it quickly. And we did this in Illustrator. I can make a version in Word or something that we could work on, but I'll go over it in Illustrator just the way we did it in class, just so you could see the before, which was bad readability, or readability, which was very difficult, and then this was kind of the finished product where we improve things. And I'll go over all of this. There's also a handout here, a PDF that we kind of went over. Now, I'll try to do it as much in this order as I can, but we're going to jump around a little bit because we may adjust font choices before we adjust all the spacing. But I tried to target all of these issues here. I even tried to format the notes nicely so that it follows some of the rules that we're even talking about in terms of headings and subheadings and space between paragraphs and space in front of subheadings and all that kind of stuff. So I tried to make this a nice looking document as well, using a nice serif typeface, using bulleted items over here, making sure they're indented and all this kind of stuff. So that's what we're going to work on. We're also going to be working on things for the web, which is fine because that's typography as well. So what we're going to do is take this very generic looking HTML page with the same content with a heading, 2 subheadings, and 3 paragraphs and make it look nice, and use some of the tools we have in web design, which is CSS, which is actually going to be working in Replit and actually working with CSS code to do that. Right now we just have HTML, which is really just the structure. So this is the default generic structure, and we're going to change this so it's nice and readable and it looks really nice. We could even throw a picture in, but we'll be doing that in Ex11. Now first, let's get back to Ex10, and that was in Illustrator, and this is kind of the finished product that we worked on. This is the starting point, and a couple of reasons why this is very difficult to read. For one thing, it's all jumbled together. We don't have space between paragraphs. We don't have first line indents. We don't have anything. And we also have a sans serif typeface, which is harder to read, a lot of body copy. And it's also an italic, which is harder to read. And it also has long line lengths. So we're going to shorten the line lengths a little bit by increasing the margin. We're also going to get rid of this justification on the right, meaning we don't want it right aligned and left aligned, just left aligned, because it makes it harder for your eyes when you go over here to get back to the next paragraph and remember where you were, because everything looks the same over here. And sometimes it even adjusts the spacing in weird ways. So this is really not very easy to read. If you tried to read this, it would be very difficult. It would be fatiguing. You'd stop halfway through. But if you read this, you'd be like, wow, you'd remember everything you read about the history of Pilsner once you read this, because it's very nice to read. There's a nice heading up here that has the lines or the leading a little bit tighter, so your eyes take that in as one unit. And that's what you want to do with bigger type. With smaller type, like the body copy we have here, we actually spread out the leading. So we have looser leading, or a higher amount of leading here, or line spacing you could call it. So it lightens things up a little bit as we read it. We even shorten the line lengths because we don't like to go across long lines. That's why when you see newspapers and magazine articles, they have multiple columns. It's just easier for your eyes to scan back and forth across shorter columns than long lines of type going across. So we shorten that a little bit without putting it in multiple columns. I'll show you how to do that though in Illustrator. And some other things we did here, we put space between the paragraphs. I think at one point we even put first line indents, which I'll show you how to do. And then we put these subheadings in a different typeface. We put our body copy in a nice serif typeface, a nice light old style typeface. And then we used a bold sans serif typeface for the subheadings, and we even made sure that our subheadings had less space after and more space before so that they go with that paragraph. It looks like they belong with that paragraph, not with the one above it. It's very clear that the subhead is leading into that paragraph. So that's what we did, and we made a nice readable document here. Nothing exciting, but readability is not exciting, but when you need to read things, it's very good to have nice readability if you have to do a lot of reading, and that's what we'll do here. So we'll start off with this. Now, a couple things just in Illustrator to be aware of. Now, first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to these guides. Now, I don't think they're locked right now. Let me see if I could grab them. Oh, I can grab them. They're not locked. I'm going to move them over. They're at 3/4 right now. I'm going to move them over to about 1 1/4. And then over here, I'm going to move it back the same distance. So it's about at 7 1/4. So I'll grab this guide and move it over to 7.25. So we have about 1.25 inches on each side. So we're shortening the margins. Now, I didn't shorten the text yet, but that's how we're going to shorten it. I'm not going to worry about the top or bottom right now. And I'm going to use just the arrow, and then when you double click in here, you'll actually have the text tool when you double click in here. But I'll go back to my arrow or my selection tool, and I'll click on the whole box. And this box is like a container. So when we make it narrower, it's not going to squash the text. It's just going to make it flow down further. So I'm going to do that first. So let me find the midpoint of this text box, which is right here. And I'm just going to drag that over. And you can see the text is coming down. And I'm going to drag this over and just basically make the text box more narrow, so it makes the text flow down. So that's one thing that'll help readability, is shorter line lengths, just easier to go across. And then while I'm at it, I'm going to get rid of this justified end here. And if you bring out your character, here's your character palette. You could use it here, or if you go to Window and then go down to Type and bring out Character, you could bring it out as a floating palette, or you could drag it in here. I'm going to use it down here. And what I'm going to do with this, now I have the whole box selected, and I'm going to go to Paragraph. This is going to be related to the paragraph. I'm going to take it off this Justify and just make it align left. So that's called ragged right. It's just easier for your eye to have this variation of line length over here to get back again. So this is nice and even over here. This is kind of varied, and it just helps you read that way. And typically straightening off the right edge, even though it looks nice and neat, does not help you read. So I'm going to change that first. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this entire typeface. I'm going to take it out of this Arial. Well, first of all, I would take it out of italic. So let me take it out of italic. I'll put it back to regular. That helps right there. It still looks very cramped. I'll click off it so you don't see all the lines underneath. But that's a little bit better, but we're going to put it in a nice serif typeface. So I'm going to click on the box, and I can change everything in the box. And I'm going to use Minion, which is a Illustrator default, Minion Pro. It's an open typeface, which means it's on multi-platforms. It could work on Mac and Windows, and it's a scalable typeface like TrueType, which we'll talk about those things later. But I'm going to make it Minion Pro, and I'm going to make everything regular. And right now it still looks crowded. It's a little bit lighter, but it's going to be easier to read. And that's pretty good for now. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this title up here, and I'll just double click in here, and I'll center it. Now I could use the paragraph tab down here, and I'll just center it, and I'll make it bold. Now I'm going to use the style drop down because there's lots of different styles. I don't just want to use like a B button or an I button. And I'll just make it bold. And it's 12 point, and I'm going to make it like double. I'll make it like 24 point. And that'll be my heading right now. And you saw in the other version I even made it 2 lines, but I'll keep it that way for now. And what I'll do with these paragraphs so they work on their own, I'm going to highlight all these paragraphs all the way down. I'm going to highlight down and go down and get all these paragraphs. Now I'm getting my text kind of redrawing. It did that in class too. Has a hard time when you're highlighting a lot of text, apparently, in Illustrator. But I'm highlighting all this, and what I'm going to do first to separate these paragraphs is I'll show you something. It's called a first line indent, and it's in here, and it's this little thing down here, first line indent, and I'm going to do it at 36 point because 72 points in an inch, 36 points would be half an inch. So I'm going to go here and go up to 36. As a matter of fact, I'll just go in here and type in 32, and I'll hit enter. And there's 32 point, and that's a first line indent, and that's typically what's used in novels and books and newspapers to indicate the first line of a paragraph. And that helps a little bit. It's still somewhat crowded, and on the web we won't always be doing that. We'll be putting space between paragraphs, and that's kind of more contemporary, is putting space between paragraphs rather than first line indent. But this is pretty traditional, especially in research papers and things like that. So this does help a little bit, but what we're going to try is something else. So that's the first line indent, and that's typically used to differentiate paragraphs so you could end one paragraph and know where to start another one. So what we're going to do here, I'll highlight this again, I'll go down and I'll get that little weird thing going on, and I'll turn this off. And while it's still highlighted, I'm going to add space. Now, we can add space before each paragraph or after. Now, I'm not sure what I'm going to do right now. I'm just going to do it before. Now down here they have space before or space after. You could choose one or the other. Typically I use before first, although if we added a subheadline, we'll find that that's probably not the best choice, but we'll try that. So I'm going to go up here and just go up to like 12 because that's what Word does. Word uses points, and actually I think it goes in 6-point increments, so maybe I'll try 6 right now. So I'm going to use 12, and that looks nice. I'm going to click off of here so I don't see all these lines underneath. And already that's starting to look a lot more readable in this method. And again, what we have is we have a serif font, which is a lot easier to read. If I zoom in here, you can see our nice serif letters. They flow into each other nicely. Serif fonts have the serifs, which allow letters to kind of fit in their little nooks, and your eyes seem to just kind of move over the letters better. Now, one thing we are going to do is kind of lighten up the leading a little bit. So let me zoom back, and I'll highlight everything again. And this time, the term leading comes from the idea of putting metal in between the lines to kind of spread out the lines when they use letterpress. But what we're going to do is extend the distance from baseline to baseline. Now you can see our baselines indicated here by these blue lines. So we're just going to extend that. Now right now, this leading is 12 over 12, which is actually really tight. If we just make it auto, that would make it like 12 over 14.4. It's about 120% or 20% more is typically what leadings use to make it a little more readable. So even if I just went here and made it auto, you can see it says 14.4. That makes it a lot easier to read. It's kind of lightening things up a little bit, and that's a little more readable. It keeps descenders from running into ascenders, and it just lightens up the page a little bit. In fact, what we could do even to make it a little more readable, since we have room here to do it, and I'll go back, I'll put it in auto first because it looks like I missed some of it. I'll put it in auto, and then what I'll do is I'll kind of click up here, and 15 looks a little better. I'll go up to like 16. So that'll be a little more than 120%. It's probably like 130, 140%. That spreads it out just a little bit more than auto and gives it a little more lightness. So if I click off of here, you can see it's kind of lighter, and it just lightens up the page a little bit. If you have a lot of body copy, and especially since we have longer line lengths, it makes it a little easier for your eye to go down the page. Now, what I'll do is I'll take a break here, because you're probably getting tired of watching me edit this. I'm going to take a break here, and then in part 2, I'll come back and we'll finish this up. We'll throw in some sub-headlines, and we'll adjust the spacing in there as well to make it a little more readable, and then we'll finish that up, and then we'll move on to Ex11, which will be working for the web.